My mother looked me in the eye and told me that money doesn't matter in a family. I had the wire transfer receipts in my hand when she said it. $80,000. 7 separate transfers over 3 years, each one requested by her, each one sent by me, each one documented with a date, an amount, and a confirmation number. She told me money doesn't matter in a family. And then she told me I was no longer welcome in hers. I want to tell you how we got to that moment, because it didn't start with money. It started the way these things always start, with love, and with the particular kind of trust that only exists between a parent and a child. My name is Natalie. I am 33 years old. I work as a software engineer at a tech company in the city, a job I worked very hard to get and that I am genuinely proud of. I grew up about 40 minutes outside the city, in a suburb where everyone knew their neighbors and the schools were decent and nothing much happened that anyone would write about. My parents, Sandra and Gerald, had lived in the same house since before I was born. My brother Danny was 4 years younger than me and had always been, in the quiet way these things happen in families, the easier child. The one who didn't ask hard questions, the one who didn't need to understand why. I want to be clear about something right at the start. My childhood was not unhappy. My parents loved me. That is true, and I have never doubted it. My mother in particular was warm and present in the way that matters, at school events and dinner tables and the small moments that add up into a childhood. But there was always something about Sandra, a way she had of setting the emotional temperature of every room she was in. When she was happy, the house was light. When she was worried, everything got heavy. Her feelings were the weather, and the rest of us, without quite deciding to, learned to watch the sky. I moved to the city at 24, finished my degree, got my first job, found a small apartment with one window and a radiator that made noise. I was happy. Not because the apartment was nice, it wasn't, but because it was mine, and because I had built something through my own work, and that feeling was one I had not expected to love as much as I did. Over the next few years, I got better at my job, got promoted twice, moved to a better apartment. I was not rich, but I was stable in a way I hadn't been before, and stable felt like a lot. The first call came on a Tuesday evening in October, about 5 years ago. I was making dinner when my mother called, and I knew from the first 2 words she said that something was wrong. Her voice had a particular quality when she was frightened, smaller than usual, careful. She told me that something had come up with the house, a repair they hadn't been able to budget for, something with the foundation that couldn't wait. She said she hated asking. She said she wouldn't ask if there was any other way. She said it was just until things settled down, and that they would pay me back as soon as they could. The amount was $8,000. I said yes without hesitating. Not because I had $8,000 sitting around doing nothing, but because these were my parents, and the house they had lived in my whole life had a foundation problem, and saying no was not something I was able to consider. I sent the money the next day. My mother called when it arrived, and she cried a little and said she didn't know what she would do without me. I told her not to worry about it. I meant that completely. 3 months passed, then 4, then 6. I didn't bring it up because I didn't want to make them feel bad. My father, Gerald, mentioned once, briefly, that they were working on getting back on their feet, and I said, "Of course, take your time," and he looked relieved, and that was the end of the conversation. The second call came 8 months after the first. Same voice, same careful smallness in it. This time it was a medical bill, something my father had needed done that their insurance hadn't fully covered. The amount was $11,000. I remember sitting with the phone in my hand for a moment after she explained. Not because I was going to say no, I wasn't, but because something small and quiet moved through me in that moment, something I filed away without naming. She said all the same things, just until things settled down. They would pay me back. She hated asking. I listened to all of it, and then I said yes, and sent the money, and told myself the feeling I had noticed was just stress from work. My friend Maya had been in my life since college. She was the kind of friend who told you the truth even when it was inconvenient, which I had always valued and occasionally found exhausting. She knew about both transfers because I had told her, and she had listened without saying much at first. After the second one, she said something I didn't fully hear at the time. She told me she wasn't judging my decision, she said that clearly, but she asked me to think about one thing. She asked whether I could afford for this money to never come back, because she said that was the question I needed to actually answer before I sent anything else. I told her I thought my parents would pay me back. I believed that. I want to be clear that I genuinely believed it. I had no idea, sitting in my apartment that evening telling Maya everything was fine, that I was already almost $20,000 in. Or that the pattern that was starting, quietly, to take shape, was going to run for 2 more years before I finally let myself see it clearly. By the time the third request came, a year had passed since the first one. Nothing had been repaid. No conversation had been started about repayment. The only time money came up between us was when my mother needed more of it. The third amount was $14,000, a car this time. Gerald's had broken down, and they needed something reliable for him to get to work. She called on the Sunday afternoon, and I remember looking out my apartment window at the street below while she explained, watching a couple walk by with a dog, something ordinary happening in the ordinary world outside. Something was different in me when I said yes that third time. I still said yes, but it felt different from the first time. The first time I had said yes with my whole chest. This time I said yes and then sat quietly for a while after the call ended. I added it up. $8,000, $11,000, $14,000, $33,000. I sat with that number for a minute. Then I put my phone down and went back to what I had been doing. Maya asked me directly that week how much it had added up to. I told her. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she told me she wanted to ask me one question and she wanted me to actually answer it. She asked me when I thought I was going to see any of it back. Not as an accusation, just as a question. She wanted to know if I had a real answer or just a feeling. I told her I thought they would figure it out once things stabilized. She nodded slowly in the way she did when she disagreed with something but had decided to let it rest for now. I appreciated that about her even when it frustrated me. Something started changing around the third or fourth transfer. It was subtle at first. The way my mother talked about the money began to sound different. Not different facts, just different framing. She stopped saying things like, "as soon as we can pay you back," and started saying things like, "you have always been so good to this family." Once, on the phone, she said something that I remember clearly even now. She said that family takes care of family, and that she was so grateful I understood that. I said, of course, but I noticed that the word loan had quietly disappeared from her vocabulary. The fourth transfer was $12,000. The fifth was $9,000, both in the second year, both requested within a few months of each other. By the end of year 2, I had sent $54,000. My own savings have gotten thinner than I was comfortable with. I had been meaning to build a proper emergency fund, and I kept not quite managing it. I told myself I would sort it out soon. I had been telling myself that for a while. The sixth request was when I first felt the thing I had been avoiding feeling. Not doubt, something closer to clarity. A quiet, uncomfortable moment of seeing something plainly that I had been choosing not to look at directly. My mother called about a home repair. Something with the roof this time, a leak that needed attention before winter. The amount was $10,000. Her voice was exactly the same as it had always been, warm and slightly apologetic, and certain that I would help because I always helped. And I did help. I sent the money. But this time, before I sent it, I said something I had not said before. I said I wanted to talk about a repayment plan when things settled down. I said it as gently as I could. I said I wasn't in a rush. I just wanted to have the conversation at some point. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, of course, we will absolutely talk about it." Her voice had shifted just slightly, not to coldness, but to something more careful, like a door that had been left open being quietly adjusted. The seventh and final transfer came 6 months later, another $11,000. I don't even remember clearly what it was for. Something that felt urgent when she explained it, and that I have since forgotten the details of. That brought the total to $80,000. I know this because I sat down one evening and added every transfer up, looking at my bank records, and wrote the number down on a piece of paper and looked at it for a long time. I printed all 7 wire transfer confirmations. I put them in a folder. I'm not entirely sure why I did that. Some part of me that was more clear-eyed than the rest of me seemed to understand that I was going to need them. I called my mother 2 weeks later and asked if we could meet for coffee, just the two of us. I said I wanted to talk about some things. She said of course and suggested that Sunday, and her voice was easy and warm and gave nothing away. I drove to the suburb on Sunday morning with the folder of receipts on the passenger seat. The drive was 40 minutes, and I spent most of it going over in my mind how to start the conversation. I wanted to be kind. I wanted to be clear. I did not want it to become something ugly. I had been in that house 10,000 times. I had eaten at that table my entire life. I thought I knew exactly how my mother responded to difficult conversations, because I had watched her respond to difficult conversations for 30 years. I had no idea, pulling into that driveway, that I was about to discover there was a version of my mother I had never actually met. The house looked exactly the way it always looked. Same porch light, same flag by the door that my father put up every spring. Nothing about it looked like a place where something was about to end. My mother hugged me at the door the way she always did, both arms, a little too tight, the way she had hugged me since I was small. For a second, I let myself believe this was going to be easy. My father called out a hello from the living room without getting up. That was normal too. He had never been the one who met me at the door. I used to think that meant nothing at all. She made coffee, the way she always did when I came home. We sat at the same kitchen table I had eaten breakfast at for 18 years, and for a minute, everything felt ordinary. I told her I wanted to talk about the money. I said it carefully. I told her I wasn't upset and I wasn't trying to start a fight. I just wanted us to have a real plan for paying it back. She set her coffee cup down. Something in her expression shifted, small but unmistakable, like a light dimming in a room I hadn't realized was that bright to begin with. She asked me why I was bringing this up now, after everything. I told her it wasn't about now. I told her it had been 3 years and $80,000, and I just wanted honesty. That was when the language started to change, right there at the table. She said she didn't understand why I was treating our own family like a bank. She said the word loan like it tasted bad in her mouth. I told her that word was hers. I reminded her, gently, that she had used it herself every single time she called. She looked at me like I had said something unkind, though all I had done was remember correctly. She reminded me that I had always been so good to this family. She said it like it was a fact that should end the conversation, not a phrase I had heard shift into place over 3 years, one transfer at a time. That was when she said it. I remember her exact words. She said that money doesn't matter in a family, and that she was disappointed I would bring up numbers when we should be talking about closeness. I sat there for a moment. I had never known money not to matter in any family I had ever been part of. I just hadn't expected to hear it from her, at that table, about $80,000 of my own money. I reached into my bag and took out the folder. 7 receipts, dates, amounts, confirmation numbers. I set it on the table between us, not to attack her, just so we could look at the same facts together. She barely looked at it. She pushed it half an inch away from her, like it might stain the table, and told me she couldn't believe I had come here with paperwork, like she was a stranger to me. She reminded me of something from years earlier, a small thing I had once said as a teenager, about always taking care of the family when I grew up. She said it like it was a signed contract instead of a kid trying to be kind. I told her the paperwork wasn't about trust. I told her it was just what had actually happened, in order, with numbers attached, and that I needed her to see it the way I saw it. That was when it stopped being about the money at all. I remember her voice rising, not loud but sharp, telling me I had always been the difficult one, always needing everything spelled out, never able to just love people without conditions. She brought up Danny, without meaning to make a point, though it made one anyway. She said Danny never made things complicated. I sat there thinking about how Danny had never once been asked for $1, and how that was exactly why. She said the word selfish. I remember it landing somewhere specific in my chest, a place that had never been touched quite that way before, not by her. I looked at my father. He was sitting at the end of the table, the way he always sat, not quite in the conversation and not quite out of it. I waited for him to say something. He didn't. He looked at his hands. He had never once, in 3 years, been the one to bring up the money, and in that moment I understood that his silence had never been neutral. It had always been a choice. My mother said one more thing before I stood up. She said that if I couldn't see this the way a real daughter would see it, then maybe I needed to think about whether I belonged in this family at all. I didn't argue. I picked up the folder, and I stood up, and I told her I loved her, because I did, and because some things stay true even when everything else is falling apart around them. I drove home in silence. 40 minutes, no radio, just the sound of my own hands on the wheel and my own thoughts, which for once I let myself actually hear. I did not cry until I was almost home. It came suddenly at a red light, and it surprised me, because I had expected to feel angry, and what I felt instead was closer to loss. For a few miles, I wondered if I had done something wrong, just by bringing the folder at all. That is the strange trick of a moment like that. It can make the honest person start doubting her own honesty. I didn't know yet that this was the last time I would sit at that table for almost a year. I didn't know that my phone, over the next few weeks, was going to go quieter than it had ever been in my entire life. Nobody called that week. I told myself that was normal, that everyone just needed a little space after a hard conversation. By the second week, I stopped telling myself that. I texted Danny first. Just a normal message, the kind we always sent each other, nothing about the money at all. He didn't answer. He had never once, in our whole lives, taken more than a day to answer me. I found out later, from an aunt who didn't know she was telling me anything sensitive, that there had been a family barbecue 3 weeks after that Sunday. I was not invited. Nobody had told me it was happening at all. Thanksgiving came a month after that. I spent it at Maya's apartment instead, eating takeout at her small kitchen table, and I remember thinking it was the first Thanksgiving in 33 years I hadn't spent with my parents. I would like to say none of it touched my job, but that would not be true. I missed a deadline that fall for the first time in years. My manager was kind about it. I still felt the weight of it for weeks. There is a specific kind of loneliness that comes from being cut out of your own family. It is not like other kinds of loss. Nobody sends flowers. Nobody understands why you're grieving people who are still alive and only 40 minutes away. Maya did not try to fix it. She didn't tell me it would all work out, and she didn't tell me I was better off. She just kept showing up. Dinner on Thursdays, whether I felt like talking or not. One night, months in, she told me something I have held on to since. She said she wasn't going to tell me what to feel about my mother, because that wasn't her place. But she said watching me hope for a phone call for months had been hard to watch, because she loved me. I spent a lot of that year thinking, really thinking, about the shape of my whole childhood. Not to blame anyone, just to finally see it clearly, the way you finally see a room once someone turns the lights all the way up. I understood, for the first time, that Sandra had never once, in 33 years, been the one to apologize first. Not to me, not to Gerald, not to anyone I had ever seen her disagree with. I don't think she planned any of it, the way a con artist plans something. I think she genuinely believed her own version of events every time she said it. That was, somehow, the hardest part to sit with. I found myself thinking about a birthday from when I was 12, a small argument I had forgotten about entirely, where my mother had rewritten what happened within an hour of it happening. I hadn't understood back then that I was watching a pattern begin. There was a stretch, around month 6, when I thought about just letting all of it go, the money and the relationship, both at once. Some nights that felt like the only peaceful option left. What stopped me was smaller than I expected. It wasn't pride, and it wasn't about the $80,000, not really. It was the thought of Danny growing up believing I was the one who had done something wrong, and never once hearing the actual story. In month 8, I made an appointment with a lawyer. Not because I was certain I wanted to sue my own mother. I wasn't certain of anything by then. I just wanted to understand what my options actually were. She was direct with me, in a way I appreciated. She told me that with 7 documented transfers, I had a real case if I chose to pursue one. She also told me that winning a case against your own parents rarely feels like winning anything at all. She asked me one question before I left her office. She asked what I actually wanted, separate from what I was owed. Not the legal answer, the real one. She had me sign nothing that day. She simply made copies of the 7 receipts and told me to keep the originals somewhere safe, in case I ever changed my mind about what to do with them. I didn't have an answer for her that day. I drove home thinking about that question for weeks, turning it over the way you turn over a stone looking for the smooth side. The answer came to me slowly, not in one moment but across many ordinary days. I didn't want to win. I wanted to be told the truth. And I was starting to understand that my mother might never be able to give me that. By the end of that year, I knew what I was not going to do. I was not going to sue my parents, and I was not going to keep waiting by a phone that wasn't going to ring. What I decided to do instead surprised even me. I decided to write my mother a letter. Not a legal letter, not a demand, just the truth, as plainly as I could put it, one time, so that it existed somewhere outside my own head. I told her I forgave her for needing help. I told her I did not forgive the way she rewrote what had happened once I asked for honesty. I told her I would always love her, and that loving her was not the same as staying available to be treated that way. I mailed it instead of emailing it. Something about a letter felt right, slower, more deliberate, the kind of thing you can't take back with one quick reply. There was one line I rewrote 4 times before I let it stay. I told her the folder of receipts was never meant to be a weapon. It was meant to be proof that I had shown up, over and over, long after I should have asked for something back. She wrote back 3 weeks later. Not a phone call, a letter of her own, which told me something before I even opened it. She didn't apologize, not exactly, but she wrote that she hadn't realized how much the money had cost me to give, only how much it had helped her to receive. That was closer to honesty than anything she had said at that kitchen table. It wasn't the apology I had hoped for, but it was something true, finally, in her own handwriting. And I found that I could hold on to that instead of the apology I had been waiting a year to hear. Danny called me on a Tuesday, almost a year to the day after the barbecue I hadn't been invited to. He didn't apologize either. He just asked how I was doing, in the ordinary voice he used to use with me before any of this started. I don't think Danny ever fully understood the numbers, even now. But he showed up, in his own small way, and I decided that mattered more than making him understand everything first. He did say one thing that stayed with me. He said he had noticed I stopped coming around, but nobody had ever explained why. Nobody had told him the number either. That asymmetry, it turned out, had never really gone away. I saw my mother in person again at the small dinner, 6 of us, months later. We did not talk about the money once. We talked about ordinary things, and it was careful, and it was smaller than it used to be, but it was real. I rebuilt my savings slowly, the way you rebuild most things, one ordinary paycheck at a time. I see my parents now, sometimes, at smaller gatherings, careful ones. It is not what it used to be. It is something else, something more honest, even if it is smaller. I still have the folder. 7 receipts, dates, amounts, confirmation numbers. I don't keep it as proof of what my family did to me anymore. I keep it as proof of who I was. All 3 years. Every single time I said yes. Generous and willing and honest, long before anyone else in that house was willing to be honest back. That is worth more to me now than $80,000 ever was. It always was, actually. I just needed a year outside my own family to finally be able to see it.